Hello, and welcome to Horizons Live from Wood Mackenzie. This is a monthly series of thought leadership author Ask Me Anythings. My name is Gavin Thompson. I'm the Vice Chairman for Energy for Europe, Middle East and Africa at Wood Mackenzie, and I'm delighted to be joined by a number of my incredible colleagues from across our energy transition, power and renewables, and metals research teams. So please allow me to introduce them. Firstly, Prakash Sharma. Prakash is Vice President, Scenarios and Technologies at Wood Mackenzie. We have Roshna, Research Analyst in our Energy Transition team. Mihir, Principal Analyst, Steel and Raw Material Markets. And finally, Harshul, Research Analyst in our Asia Pacific Solar team. And we're all here today to discuss our January Horizons entitled Chance of a Lifetime. Can India show the developing world a unique path to net zero? Now, the plan for today is rather than go through the insight in depth, which you can, of course, read on woodmac.com/horizons, but rather to have a chat around the topic, to perhaps provoke alternative views and to challenge our own views on this insight. So thanks again for joining us, and I'll just dive right in with my first question for the team. So this is to the whole team, I think, but Prakash, maybe I'll pose it to you first. When I first read this Horizons, I was struck by something that set it apart from virtually all others, and that was, perhaps I'll call it its audacity. It's a pretty audacious piece of work, but no less valuable for it. Now, the report is categorical that not only is India not reaching net zero by 2050 in our base case, but is currently, you could say, light years from that base case. But by tackling the question, our analysis was, by definition, and I'm quoting from the Horizons here, highly ambitious, extremely challenging, and without precedent. So what was the motivation for this analysis?
Sure. Thanks, Gavin, and hi everyone. Let me begin with a perspective here. So India has risen from being a 10th largest economy in the world a few years ago to being a 5th largest today, right behind the US, China, Japan, and Germany. In less than 10 years, it could become 3rd largest and on a path to becoming a $15 trillion economy by 2050 or more. That is about 5 times growth in GDP from current levels. So what needs to happen to achieve this goal? We believe India needs to harness its 3 unique advantages. And that will allow India to realize its potential. Firstly, its vast human talent. India's working age population is almost 900 million people, and we expect it will continue to grow at least for the next 15-20 years. That's a massive market for any commodity, any technology to begin with. The second unique advantage India has is its large domestic market for goods and services. So it is 3rd biggest for energy, power, and a number of commodities such as oil, gas, solar, wind, and potentially hydrogen and CCUS as well. And finally, the 3rd biggest advantage or maybe enabler is the government spending on infrastructure and industrial sectors. It is visible. If you visit India, you will see the construction that is going around the country in terms of roads, rail, buildings, airports. It's all visible that the government spending has stepped up quite substantially in the last 5 years or so. And there is expectation that private sector investment will follow soon. So these 3 unique advantages, we believe, will allow India to do something different, to demonstrate something different. And what is interesting is that these advantages and strengths are coming in at a time and allows India to deliver its net zero pledge much earlier than 2070. We believe India can energize and decarbonize at the same time. Of course, there are a number of risks and uncertainties and challenges, and we can definitely dive into them in the session later.
Thanks, Prakash. And I certainly agree. On my recent visits to India, it feels like China 20, 25 years ago in terms of that scale of construction and infrastructure. So let's pick up on some of those points. So yes, highly ambitious, but possible. Okay. So if we accept that there's even a chance of India getting to net zero within this time frame, then let's discuss what it's going to take. And I want to kick this off firstly at a macro level, and then we'll bring it down into some of the detail. So Prakash, I'll stick with you. You've got a wealth of experience covering India and global energy markets. If I look at India right now, I feel a little bit confused in some ways because I hear huge ambition and investment in clean energy and renewables, micro-scale projects, solar heating, ambitions around hydrogen. But I also see the government continue to invest in coal, build coal-fired power plants, and most recently, and I was at last year's India Energy Week, talking a lot about licensing new oil and gas acreage and continue to maximize the use of its domestic hydrocarbons. How does that dichotomy work out? Can India move more quickly in the direction of clean energy, or are we going to see fossil fuels, conventional energy working alongside clean energy?
Sure, Gav, it's a transition. India's energy demand is growing, and renewables currently are not at the stage technologically or even operationally to completely move away from fossil fuels, especially oil, gas, and coal. So if you just think about what was discussed at COP28 last month in Dubai, for the first time, government leaders have agreed to kind of put in agree on a text to that fossil fuel transition needs to take place by 2050. So, and India is not going to be any different. So the good thing is that incremental demand in India is increasingly coming from renewable energy. So I guess there is going to be a time where this inflection point or the tipping point comes, say around early 2030s, where renewables investment and renewable energy production starts to overtake fossil fuel consumption and production of that. So I guess the other thing I think we need to understand is that because it is a transition and governments need to take society in with along with them. So a happy society will allow governments to deliver a transition by 2050 or 2060. So there need not be a knee-jerk reaction. That is why if you read the report, you will see over the next 5-10 years or so, emissions continue to grow, but at a much slower pace. So the divergence start to come in post 2030, and that is the state of the market in India. Because it's a 1.4 billion people, 900 million of them are working age. So government needs to create those jobs. Government needs to create that conducive environment to allow more foreign investment to come in, allow more new technologies to come in and be tested. And we have seen some of that is happening. But that said, I would not undermine the challenges and the risks around them. And there are a number of them. So first being that cost of capital in India is very high. So if domestic companies need to invest, they need to either access the global market or raise capital locally, because this requires a huge amount of capital investment in building, in developing new supply, but also developing new demand centers like cement mills, steel mills, power plants. So I think for a number of years, I think it has to go in tandem, but then a divergence away from transition fuels or fossil fuels would come sometime in 2030s or so. And that is the thinking that has gone into this horizon space.
Great. Okay, well, you talk about fossil fuels. Let's pick up on the most polluting of them all with coal. India is a large and growing market for coal. And Roshna, I want to ask you about this. So in your opinion, what are the potential avenues to diminish the demand for coal in India? And accepting as Prakash mentioned, that might not really get underway until we get through to the sort of 2030s. How does India do it?
Yeah, so currently India is planning to increase the coal production quite a lot. So it's around like doubling the current production, reaching to around 1.5 billion tons by 2030. And also there's quite a lot of coal-based power plants in plan, like around 80 gigawatt. So this is like making India both hero and villain. So at the same time, investing into renewables, it's making investment more into coal as well. This is mainly because of making the power supply more reliable and available. Because last year we have seen quite a lot of power demand increase. The peak demand met increased to around 240 gigawatt, and coal was the base load. So around 100 gigawatt, more than 100 gigawatt was the coal's contribution during the peak days. So this means that the government is thinking about more coal is needed. It can play a critical role. But at the same time, India can do more on this. So investing more on making reliable existing coal assets. So for example, in the power sector, which is a major coal consumer, there were around 40 gigawatt of unplanned outages in the last year, and most of these plants were not being operated around the peak demand time. And this signals government that they need to invest more on new coal-based power plants. But along with going forward with that decision, government needs to focus more on making the existing assets more reliable, doing more maintenance, and avoiding the unplanned outages, so that instead of focusing on investing or making exposure to new coal assets, they can divert that into renewable capacity. Another point on the coal-based power plant is making it more flexible, reducing the minimum load in which it can operate, like improving the ramping rates. We have seen some examples even in the developing countries, like China did a very well job making the coal-based power plants more flexible and improving the ramping rates, so that we can reduce the dependence on coal and increase the penetration of renewable technologies. So that way we could make more aggressive decisions on shifting to clean technologies. So along with coal, I would like to add on gas, because you mentioned about there's a lot of talk about gas developments in India. This has been in plan for India, like increasing the gas consumption. There were quite a lot of gas pipeline expansion and LNG facility expansion happen, and it is under plan. So mainly because the current gas consumption is around 60 BCM, that's the current number, and it's likely to increase to around 150 BCM, which is the base case. That's the scenario, or that's the case that we are likely to see based on the current progress. In that 60 BCM, the current consumption, around 45% is imports, and remaining is from our own production. And all these production that we have currently is gonna cease production by around 2040. And to maintain that domestic production and to reduce the reliance, country needs to invest more on gas developments, explorations, along with more investments going into LNG facilities and expansion of pipeline networks. There were a lot of delay in pipeline networks happened because of land acquisition. So those things are kind of priority along with renewable technology adoption.
Thanks, Roshna. And I think that point on gas is consistent with our net zero 2050 view globally, that gas still has a role to play as a transition fuel, and also increasingly paired with CCUS. And Mihir, I want to turn to you. You've done a lot of work on the hard to abate sectors, and I know in India those sectors, sectors like steel, cement, petchems, they currently account for about 3/4 of the total industrial emissions. And in this report, you outline the key issues with these sectors, and we're all aware of these. But as we go from the macro to the micro, can you detail what would be the key pathways for these industries to decarbonize and reach net zero broadly within the time frame we're talking about, and what would that take?
Right. Thanks, Gav. So we have a strong belief within WoodMac that sustainability must be like a prerequisite for economic growth. India is currently, uniquely positioned among the world's major economies, where other economies are looking at focusing on increasing the share of services related sectors. India is placing a little bit higher emphasis on manufacturing And that is quite clear. We can see a strategic shift in government's policy making when it comes to industrial growth, like focusing on Make in India initiative, production-linked incentive programs, and then prioritizing the purchase of domestically produced or manufactured products. But in all of these scenarios, India must also exercise caution, in our opinion. They must not exacerbate its already worsening emission profile. There must be a deliberate balance that must be drawn between, I would say, economic growth and sustainability. And this is very well true for the hard to abate sectors like cement, iron and steel, and petrochemicals. And given that the growth path that the industrial sector is on, industrial emissions will need to fall about 25% from current levels, including the growth that we get over the next 3 decades, to reach net zero by 2050. And decarbonizing these sectors will not just kind of require a effective collaboration between industry, the government, and the stakeholders, across the value chain in order to achieve this. And let me take the example of some of the most polluting sectors that we have in the industrial domain, cement, steel. Now, these sectors are going to be on a robust growth trajectory over the next 3 decades, given that the government is pushing for so much capital investments. In fact, in today's budget, the government has hiked the capital investment for the coming fiscal to about $135 billion, which is about 11% year-on-year rise. And in our opinion, this investment trajectory has just begun and is just going to continue for a long period of time. Now, in terms of looking at these sectors from a decarbonization perspective, right? If I take cement first, cement has process emissions which account for about 2/3 of their total emissions, and these are going to be very challenging to abate till newer technologies are adopted. But for cement, in the near term, energy emissions can be mitigated. Efficiency measures like waste heat recovery or usage of clean energy can reduce emissions by 10 to 15% for the sector. Blending more fly ash or having slag-based substitution products in the market can reduce emissions by another 20%. And over the longer term, the focus will need to be on, greener products such as composite cements, which have just made its inroads into the market. Looking at newer technologies, for example, trying to electrify kilns, co-firing hydrogen, and then obviously CCUS will support these decarbonization initiatives. When I come to steel, India is one of the fastest growing country when it comes to steel consumption. But unlike cement, the share of process emissions in steel is lower, and the share of energy-led emissions is a bit higher. So that is where the primary focus of, let's say, steel makers should be. Over the longer term, yes, we need to move away from the highly polluting blast furnaces and start employing the low carbon intensive electric arc furnaces that will give an impetus to decarbonization. But in the near term, I guess looking at energy efficiency measures, looking at superior quality of feedstock and resource efficiency measures, employing circular economy, increasing the use of scrap, and then looking at, over the medium to longer term, then looking at the role of hydrogen and CCUS that will come in to play for steel, will act as key enablers for the sector to achieve the net zero target. So in a sense, I would say the industrial sector will have to pull up a lot of levers to initially curtail the energy-led emissions and then focus more on the process-led emissions. And a lot of capital investment is required in the sector, not just from the private sector itself, but also from the government in terms of employing a favorable infrastructure for these sectors to decarbonize. For example, having the industrial sector access the clean energy will be a critical push for abating emissions from a near to medium term perspective as well.
Okay, thanks, Mihir. I'm hearing huge investment required, likely public-private partnership, and of course a major role for policy. And India is not unique in that, but probably has to go faster than many other countries. Harshul, a lot of what Mihir talked about was the role of electrification in reducing emissions from the most polluting sectors. Or if you could expand on that, and also talk a little bit about the establishment of low-cost renewable supply chains in India, the role of government and private business in that, and how that's going to progress more quickly?
Sure, Gav. So, as Mihir mentioned, rapid growth in renewables is essential to electrify India's future economy, and building Indian renewable supply chain is the need of the hour. We have taken up a very ambitious target of 500 gigawatt of renewables target by 2030. And to achieve that, an immediate first step is to at least ensure the incremental year-on-year growth in power demand is met entirely by renewables. So what the government is doing in the form of policy support. First, to boost domestic production, the Indian government has launched a scheme that rewards select solar manufacturers with funding for the production and sale of polysilicon wafers and solar cells and modules, which meet compliance checks. So this is the production linked incentive scheme, which is one of the primary catalysts spurring the growth of the entire PV manufacturing ecosystem in India. Approximately 48 gigawatt capacity has been allotted in auctions to 14 companies across the production value chain, and it is expected to triple the current module and cell production capacity by 2026. But there are some challenges. These incentives need to be strengthened if India has to scale up its manufacturing ecosystem over the coming years. It excites the industry, but it doesn't really assist them to set up a solar factory. So, like, my recommendation would be, I believe the PLI scheme should be expanded in such a manner to include more upstream components, PV equipment, machinery, as well as ancillary components for a holistic development of the PV manufacturing ecosystem. Further, to help small manufacturers that have limited capital available, the government can look at the scheme at providing upfront subsidies for setting up manufacturing units. Because if China puts restrictions on exports of wafer production technology, we should be concerned that India might be shut out of key technological know-how before it can even scale its own production. Even with this policy, PLI, the conundrum is how will producers make the upstream raw materials if China doesn't help? So there's a need for stronger cooperation between India and other nations to diversify the solar supply chain. Apart from PLI, there's another one which is basics custom duty. So to increase the demand at home and to support the domestic manufacturers, India has taken up some steps to curb Chinese imports by imposing some duty in the form of taxes to imported modules and imported cells. So 40% on imported modules and 25% on cells respectively. The challenge here is but there's a glut in the market, which has seen the price of high quality Chinese solar panels drop to a historical low last year. So even with this BCD tax, imported Chinese modules remain slightly cheaper than the Indian ones. So on the contrary, Indian government has escalated the production costs. And the third one is the approved list of modules and manufacturers, which was released last year, a policy requiring all the government energy projects to use only solar cells and modules from an approved list of Indian manufacturers, which has been proposed till the March of this year, giving some time for local production to catch up with the pipeline of projects. So overall, I would say that this lack of maturity of domestic solar production, the curve on imports, and the growing exports to the US at the expense of domestic use could make it more difficult and expensive for India to meet its renewable energy goals. And the government should chime in for more aggressive policies for the future.
Thanks, Harshul, and a pretty categorical message there. Prakash, Harshul's talked about the importance of building domestic or shorter, more secure solar supply chains in India. But of course, solar is only one part of the jigsaw. So I'm interested in understanding India's position across other low-carbon technology supply chains and where are those evolving, where are the bottlenecks? And I'm thinking everything from electrolyzers to batteries to EVs, that could be 2 or 3 wheelers as well, and carbon capture. What's happening and what's needed to really get those sectors moving at home?
Sure, Gav. So as Mihir and Harshul mentioned, I think the ingredients are very simple. So you need policies, you need capital, and you need technologies. So capital and technology won't flow if the policy environment is not clear. So, or incentives are not clear. So, as I said, cost of capital in India is pretty high. So, if the government wants domestic companies to invest and expand local manufacturing and increase supply chain capabilities, the policy incentives need to increase, need to expand, either in terms of setting some domestic mandate demand targets, for example, or providing clear incentives to domestic companies who are going to produce locally. That said, I think from a technology standpoint, India also offers a very, very well established and growing market at home to allow and test those technologies, whether it is electrolyzers or long duration batteries or even EVs, for example. So India is a vibrant market. So if government can provide some sort of a clear policy environment and capital subsidies, for example, then there is a ready market to be tested. So that will allow Indian companies to gain more confidence about emerging technologies, because those technologies are still in early stage. Their lifespan is very short. So they are only less than 5 years old, and there are very few projects operating worldwide. So you don't know electrolyzers, what is the actual efficiency of a typical electrolyzer, what is the degradation rate. So I think by having those testing facilities, those early stage projects established in India, will allow companies to become more confident about scaling production and scaling adoption. That said, there are a couple of very interesting strategies emerging within the domestic players. So, for example, a number of utilities and industrial companies in India are kind of going backward integration. So, a typical renewable company is going to, they are kind of trying to set up their own supply chain manufacturing. Or renewables companies trying to become a hydrogen producer, or a fertilizer company trying to become an ammonia producer, or a kind of petrochemical company trying to become a methanol and ammonia producer. So I think these are backward integration or forward integration initiatives or strategies will allow Indian companies to become more confident. But I guess the ingredient is that the right amount of capital, the cost of capital needs to fall quite substantially, but also the right policy environment so that these technologies can be scaled, can be tested, so that when the time comes post 2030 to rapidly move away from fossil fuels, they can be deployed at a scale not only at home, but also allow Indian companies to export some of these technologies abroad.
Okay, so I'm going to pick up on those last words there. So you talk about deployment at scale. Now, Harshul, when I think about renewables, we tend to think in gigawatts, capacity, and so forth. But we know globally that one of the big challenges with the build-out of renewables isn't just the capacity, but it's taking that electricity to the consumer, into the market. And that requires investment in grids, in storage, and so forth. Where are we with that in India? And what are the major challenges associated with building out the midstream capacity?
Sure. Like the power demand is galloping healthy at 9%, matching renewable energy capacity addition is stalling. So what are the challenges? I would say even though the central government has come up with a timeline, let's say, to add 50 gigawatt renewable through central auctions, out of which 40 gigawatt is in solar and hybrid projects, while rest 10 gigawatt is in wind. This over-reliance on tendering volumes put out by central agencies and marginal volumes coming out of the states. So that's like a big issue. We are risking the entire transition only to the center with a little action from state level. The second challenge is the land and connectivity, especially on the interstate transmission system. The bidding paradigm, which is it's tariff fixated, incentivizes and concentrates capacity addition to resource-rich states. So this puts unnecessary burden on land and transmission capacity at these resource-rich points. We need more state-specific tenders to balance this trend to broad-based capacity growth geographically. Another challenge can be frequency these regulatory changes are very frequent. Example, we have the new grid code, GNA regulations, DSM changes, ALM extension, green open access, all hit the developers in one single year. So these flip-flops on the implementation of policies and like the ILMM, they have enhanced project uncertainty in the shorter term. So that's why like I've seen a lot of CNI and let's say rooftop market developers in this. They have shown they have like not readily like participating. They want the policy environment is good, but it keeps on changing every short term. So that's a major drawback, I would say, in this kind of scenario.
Great, thanks for that. And I'm hearing policy and policy and policy. Maybe with policy will the answer to the next question. I suspect it probably will, because Roshna, I wanted to ask you about some of the more nascent technologies, and of course they must play a part in decarbonizing India. And I'm thinking specifically hydrogen, electrolytic green hydrogen, and carbon capture and storage. And maybe if you go with carbon capture first, we've got continued growth in fossil fuel demand, continued growth in emissions. How does India get its carbon capture industry up and running?
Yeah, so far India has been not playing much role. So it's very starting point in terms of CCUS. We just have one enhanced oil recovery project, just one, which is still in pilot stage, and nothing much in terms of storage, carbon capture and storage. There are a couple of few projects in utilizing captured carbon dioxide to methanol production. It's mainly because of lack of confidence among the developers. Even if they want to pursue that, the high cost, and there is no solid support from the government. There are some, even the Niti Aayog, which is the central think tank institution, they had put up like a theoretical potential and which sectors we need to tackle, but nothing much on the policy support side, on financial, or nothing on framework that India had been done in solar, wind, and now doing in hydrogen. So that needs to be streamlined. CCUS needs to be focused more, because most of the India's production units are young, and there are a couple of more projects coming in line by 2030. So for example, in iron and steel sector, currently around 90 million tons of production, and that is going to increase to around 140 million tons by 2030. And all of these projects are blast furnace based, and that requires CCUS to attach to it, because hydrogen and bioenergy have a limited role to play for decarbonizing iron and steel and hard to abate sectors. Government needs to have a push on that, and on providing some policy support and financial support. It can tie up with some partnership with some of the oil companies, PSUs, like ONGC. They have their gas production base, and there are a couple of gas reservoirs which are gonna stop production, cease production. So those things need to be tied up and need to do some more pilot studies. And another point is on lack of R&D investments in India. We currently invest like around less than 1% into R&D, and that needs to be more, because these technologies are nascent in most of the market. So it's a win-win situation. So if India could streamline the money to that and develop those technologies, that could it can play a technology partner role as well. And another point on having a constant or a stable policy. So as Harshul mentioned, so in India it's very diversified policies. You can see central policies, then state policies, and there are a lot of regulations. Like for example, for CCUS or any technologies adoption or implementation, you need permissions at a local consistency level. So these things needs to be taken up by the central government or the state government as such, and consider it as kind of a baby and put it up.
Okay, and with hydrogen, I think of India's huge potential as a hydrogen producer. I know there are actually plans that India is a hydrogen exporter. Where are we with that with everyone's favorite future fuel?
Yes, so India had got a lot of traction on hydrogen in the past year. There were a huge investment incentive announcement from the government, around $2.1 billion. It's very less compared to EU and US, but still it makes India into the limelight that it's a potential market, and it has currently around 6 million tons of announcements for hydrogen, for green hydrogen. And we expect that around 4 million tons would come into online by 2030. So these incentives for green hydrogen had made more players to come. So in fact, the tendering had surpassed what is allocated. So there were quite a large number of players that want to bid for incentives. And also, the government had just recently released another incentives for demand side adoption of hydrogen. It's mainly for refineries and fertilizer industry, because those are the sectors that consumes hydrogen currently, and that wants that could easily get shifted to green hydrogen. And in terms of electrolyzer, which is needed for the producing hydrogen, like around 12 gigawatt is announced stage, but still it's still skeptical that how much of it would come online. So to produce or reach the government's target of 5 million tons, it requires around 60-70 gigawatt of electrolyzer. So we are lacking on that part. And as Prakash mentioned about, we currently don't know how efficient it would be, at what minimum rate it can operate. So these kinds of technologies needs to be focused or mainstreamed into R&D, so that we need to focus more on quality, and by focusing more on quality, eventually we could grab more demand or export to other countries. And you mentioned about hydrogen being as an exporter. So we see that the hydrogen used for making other derivatives like green steel there's a good potential for that, but still DRI itself, it's a nascent stage. We don't adopt much DRI, so needs to make more focus on DRI based gas, so that we could once the hydrogen or is getting developed, once the supply is getting developed, we can adopt that. So it should be a combination of focusing on R&D, supply side, and demand side changes.
Great. So optimism, but clearly a long way to go. And we're almost out of time. So I'm going to ask you all a very quick question. And it's a very simple question. Is, we've talked about everything from fossil fuels through to solar, wind, storage, renewables, carbon capture, grid infrastructure investment. If we were to fast forward to 2030, 2032, where we're on this springboard of the energy transition, which of these sectors do you think is going to do best? Well, where's the money going to flow? Where's the most excitement going to be? Prakash, first to you.
I guess renewables is where the money is going to flow the most in 10 years' time, because by then India probably would become a third largest economy. But I think we also need to remember that energy transition is a trade-off. It's a trade-off between existing technologies and newer technologies. So I think India will try to maximize its current potential of renewable energy across solar and wind in 10 years' time. And I think that is where most investment would go in.
It might be the most, but is it going to be the most exciting? Is it going to get the best returns? Harshul, what do you think? I know you're going to say solar, but if you weren't allowed to say solar, what would you say?
No, I mean, just like Prakash mentioned, it will be renewables, but it will be not just plain vanilla solar or wind. It will be some hybrid, like combined with storage. So, as the new government is pushing policies towards solar and wind, there is a similar trend going on for battery storage as well. So, energy security is at the back of the mind, and that is the, like, I would say, the need of the hour. So 2030, we are still in renewables. We are very nascent stage right now, but 2030 it will be renewables, but with storage. It will be either battery one or hydro, but something to like give a push towards security, energy security. That I think of.
Thank you. And Mihir, you're a raw materials guy. What have you got?
I would say focusing on newer technologies. This is going to be a unique challenge for India because India has to manage growth along with tech, and there is a lot of I would say appetite for newer capacities to come in, and if they come through greener and sustainable tech, for example hydrogen or CCUS, then that would be the cherry on the top.
Lovely, lovely. Roshna, the final word to you. What's going to blossom and make investors very happy?
Yeah, so I think it will be like renewables is going to continue, and which will be more like secured, because in the news you'll always hear that the peak demand is more met with coal. There is no much coal supply. All those issues we'll hear. So I think that is gonna stop by 2030, early 2030s, with more storage coming into play, and also I hope that there will be more like a good electrolyzer manufacturing, like India based manufacturing also coming into mainstream.
Great. I'm glad you said that. Folks, we're out of time. It's been a fantastic debate. I've learned so much. I've heard a lot of different opinions on what is, for me, the most fascinating energy market right now, with so much potential to keep growing the economic growth, the entrepreneurial spirit of India, but those huge challenges and opportunities around the pace of emissions growth and how India decarbonizes. Lots more to be said. We're always keen to hear from you. Wood Mackenzie will be out in force at India Energy Week in Goa between the 6th and 9th of February. So please do get in touch about that. We'd love to chat. And on behalf of Prakash, Roshna, Mihir, and Harshul, thank you for listening, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Goodbye.